In the spring of 1618, Europe was on the edge of transformation, teetering between the old world and the new. Between empire and anarchy, between the known and the unthinkable. The 30 Years' War had not yet erupted. Yet the mechanisms that would trigger one of the most devastating conflicts in human history were quietly assembling. At the heart of this unfolding catastrophe lay a secret, an almost invisible agreement between two rulers, whose ambitions, fears, and psychological impulses would ripple across the continent in ways no one could predict. Imagine for a moment the mind of a king shaped not only by upbringing and intellect, but by the raw neurochemistry of fear and desire. In those private chambers, decisions were made that balanced on a knife edge between survival and annihilation. What if I told you this secret pact, forged in ink and shadows, almost rewrote the trajectory of the modern world? That the alignment of two human psyches, each acting as a complex adaptive system, had the power to destabilize the social energy networks of entire nations? History is often told as a sequence of events, but beneath the surface lies a web of perception, stress response, and decision-making that operates much like the human brain. The kings were not merely strategists. They were nodes in a vast, delicate network, where every action sent signals that reverberated unpredictably. Their secret deal, an accord between Ferdinand II, the staunch Habsburg Archduke and soon-to-be Holy Roman Emperor, and Frederick V, the Elector Palatine, whose Protestant lineage and political ambitions made him a focal point of continental tension, exemplifies how cognition, ideology, and survival instinct intersect in ways that can appear almost chaotic. The accord itself was ostensibly simple, a mutual understanding regarding territorial claims and political alliances. A promise not to act aggressively against one another's domains while covertly negotiating influence in smaller principalities. On paper, it resembled a rational optimization of power, yet the underlying neuropsychology tells a more profound story. Both rulers were operating under extreme stress, chronic uncertainty, threats from rival dynasties, and the perception of existential risk activate what modern neuroscience identifies as the amygdala-driven threat response. This is the very same mechanism that governs fight or flight reactions in humans. It amplifies perception of danger, biases attention toward potential losses, and skews decision-making toward protective, often preemptive measures. When we examine the historical record through this lens, we begin to understand why the agreement, seemingly prudent, was also precarious. The human brain, much like a feedback system, can amplify small fluctuations into cascading effects, a phenomenon physicists describe as sensitive dependence on initial conditions or the butterfly effect. The king's psychological states functioned as input signals into the broader European system, where each court, army, and city-state acted as interconnected nodes, dynamically adjusting to both perceived and real threats. In this sense, the pact was not merely a bilateral arrangement, but a signal that propagated through the social network. Consider how the perception of security or insecurity can alter collective behavior. When Ferdinand II interpreted Frederick V's willingness to negotiate as a sign of weakness, his own amygdala-driven threat circuits likely intensified, prompting more aggressive posturing elsewhere. Likewise, Frederick, perceiving the Habsburgs' consolidation of power as an existential danger, mobilized alliances with Protestant princes who were themselves embedded in complex interdependent networks. In essence, the secret deal was a node-level interaction within a massive continent-wide system, where feedback loops were not only political but psychological. The network dynamics of Europe were remarkably sensitive to perturbation. This leads us to a counterintuitive insight. History, at its deepest level, is as much a story of information flow, perception, and adaptive behavior as it is a record of battles, treaties, and dynastic succession. A single misinterpretation, a subtle shift in perception, or a delayed response could cascade into events that no individual actor could fully control. As the agreement progressed, it produced a paradoxical effect. By attempting to stabilize the relationship between two powerful rulers, it inadvertently introduced instability into the surrounding regions. Princes and city-states, uncertain of where loyalties truly lay, began to hedge their bets, forming temporary alliances, fortifying defenses, and mobilizing troops. This adaptive behavior, though rational on a local scale, magnified systemic stress. The human brain thrives on pattern recognition, seeking causal relationships even where randomness predominates. Leaders like Ferdinand and Frederick, interpreting signals from distant courts and intelligence networks, were engaging in real-time pattern analysis, constantly updating internal models of probability and risk. However, the limitations of perception, combined with high-stakes stress, meant that errors in judgment were inevitable. Each misjudged signal acted as a micro-trigger, nudging the system closer to critical thresholds. Within months, what had begun as a private accord evolved into a complex multi-level tension that encompassed religion, commerce, and territorial integrity. This is where the philosophical dimension enters. If history is understood as the trajectory of adaptive systems responding to information under constraints, then the secret deal illustrates a profound principle. Our attempts to control uncertainty can paradoxically amplify it. The human impulse to negotiate, to hedge risk, and to secure advantage interacts with the systemic properties of societies in ways that are often nonlinear and unpredictable. In neuropsychological terms, this reflects the interplay between the prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and foresight, and the more primal subcortical structures that govern emotion and survival instinct. When the balance tilts too far toward emotion-driven reactions, under chronic stress, even well-intentioned agreements can become seeds of large-scale disruption. The 30 Years' War that erupted shortly thereafter was, in part, a delayed consequence of this fragile alignment. While the pact itself did not directly cause open conflict, the information signals it generated perceived threats. Shifts in allegiance and cascading mistrust propagated through the European social network. Collective behavior, much like neural activity, can amplify minor perturbations into significant events. From a modern perspective, we can model the situation using concepts from network theory. Each principality, duchy, and kingdom functions as a node with weighted connections representing alliances, enmities, and economic dependencies. The secret deal acted as a perturbation at two influential nodes, altering signal transmission across the network. Feedback loops in neighboring nodes intensified systemic instability, ultimately contributing to a continent-wide cascade war. Imagine looking at a brain scan, observing neurons firing in response to a stimulus. The patterns of excitation, inhibition, and feedback reflect a delicate equilibrium. A small change can either be absorbed or trigger a chain reaction. Europe in the early 17th century behaved in a remarkably analogous way. Individual actors, each with bounded rationality and cognitive biases, contributed to emergent phenomena that no one could fully anticipate. There is a subtle irony here. The very act of attempting to secure personal and dynastic survival, rational objective and isolation creates conditions for widespread vulnerability. This resonates with philosophical reflections on human behavior. The pursuit of safety, status, or certainty often generates the opposite outcome. The deal between Ferdinand and Frederick illustrates this in microcosm. One of the most intriguing aspects is how perception diverged from reality. Frederick's envoys interpreted Habsburg gestures through a lens of threat perception, even when Ferdinand's actions were calculated and defensive. Likewise, Ferdinand's advisors read Protestant mobilizations as existential challenges, not as rational attempts at self-preservation. These misalignments in perception, amplified by cognitive heuristics and emotional arousal, demonstrate the core insight from neuroscience and history. Humans are not purely rational agents. Our decisions are shaped by neural circuits evolved for survival in environments far different from complex geopolitical landscapes. The social consequences are equally striking. Towns and cities, dependent on the protection of princes, experienced economic disruptions long before open hostilities. Market networks reacted to perceived instability. Commodity prices fluctuated, population movements shifted, and trust, a fundamental social neurotransmitter, was compromised. In effect, the hidden pact set off a systemic stress response analogous to cortisol flooding the human brain, adaptive in the short term, potentially destructive if prolonged. This brings us to the twist that is as counterintuitive as it is revealing. In the moments when the king's actions seemed to weaken regional stability, they were simultaneously preserving the broader system's capacity to adapt. Just as neural circuits exhibit homeostatic mechanisms, adjusting excitability to prevent runaway activation, the early diplomatic maneuvers prevented more catastrophic, immediate conflict. The secret deal, while flawed and ultimately insufficient to prevent war, served as a buffering signal, a delay that allowed societies to partially adjust. In other words, perceived weakness or indecision in a ruler was not merely a flaw. It was a form of systemic protection, an emergent property of complex human networks. That underscores the subtle intelligence embedded in adaptive systems. There is a lesson here for contemporary observers as well. Modern societies, with their interconnected economies, digital information flows, and geopolitical entanglements, operate under similar principles. Micro-decisions at influential nodes, whether governments, corporations, or social leaders, propagate signals whose full consequences are impossible to predict. Understanding the interplay between individual cognition, collective perception, and network dynamics offers a profound framework for interpreting history. Not as a series of inevitable outcomes, but as a dance of adaptive, sometimes fragile intelligence. Returning to the historical narrative, the eventual collapse of the secret deal did not produce immediate annihilation, but the cascade it triggered shaped Europe for decades. Wars, treaties, dynastic shifts, and demographic transformations can all be traced back to the interactions of perception, stress response, and adaptive behavior. From a psychological perspective, the event exemplifies how human systems operate under bounded rationality, where perception, emotion, and information processing limitations interact. From a philosophical standpoint, it illuminates the tension between intention and consequence, between control and chaos. The pact between Ferdinand and Frederick is a vivid case study in how complexity theory applies to human history. Small perturbations in high-influence nodes can cascade into systemic change, often in ways that are nonlinear, unpredictable, and counterintuitive. As we reflect on this story, we see that history is not merely a succession of kings, battles, and treaties. It is a tapestry of cognitive interactions, network dynamics, and adaptive responses. Every decision is a signal, every perception a filter, every alliance a feedback loop. The secret deal reminds us that even the most private negotiations have public consequences. That the interplay of psychology, physiology, and social structure is always at work, often invisibly, shaping the trajectory of civilizations. Perhaps the most profound insight is also the most human. Our brains, our societies, and our histories are deeply interconnected adaptive systems. In moments of apparent fragility, we may in fact be observing the very mechanisms that preserve stability over longer timescales. What seems like weakness or indecision may be an expression of systemic intelligence at work, a form of resilience that only becomes apparent in hindsight. And so, when we read the chronicles of Europe in the early 17th century, or any period of profound human turbulence, we should look beyond the surface. The wars, the treaties, the political machinations are the signals, the overt expressions of deeper cognitive and social dynamics. The hidden agreements, the secret negotiations, the pauses and hesitations carry as much meaning, if not more, than the headline events. This perspective transforms our understanding of history from a linear narrative of cause and effect into a rich, multidimensional landscape of interacting systems. It invites us to consider our own decisions, our own social networks, and our perception of risk not as isolated actions but as contributions to emergent phenomena, whose consequences may unfold in ways we cannot fully anticipate. In the end, the secret deal between Ferdinand II and Frederick V is a microcosm of human behavior itself. Complex, adaptive, prone to error, yet imbued with subtle forms of intelligence that only careful observation and reflection can reveal. It reminds us that history is as much a study of mind and perception as it is a record of events, and that the past, much like the human brain, operates on levels that intertwine. So the next time we marvel at the grand sweep of history, we should pause to recognize the hidden agreements, the subtle signals, and the cognitive circuits of power that shape outcomes far beyond the awareness of any single individual. Because within those unseen interactions lies the true engine of change, the quiet force that can almost, but not quite, destroy the world. And in that reflection lies a call to humility, a recognition that human systems are both fragile and resilient. And that understanding the interplay between perception, decision-making, and social networks is key to navigating the complexities of our own time. If this exploration of history through the lens of neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy sparked your curiosity, dive deeper with me in the comments. Share your thoughts on how perception shapes collective outcomes. Discuss which historical examples resonate with this framework, and reflect on the delicate balance. Don't forget to like this video if it challenged the way you think about history, Subscribe to Past Lens for more insights into the hidden mechanisms behind human civilization and hit the notification bell so you never miss a journey into the past that connects directly to the way we understand ourselves today.